For 20 years, my husband told me we were too old for that. Last winter, a 61-year-old widower with clay under his fingernails proved that the only thing too old in my marriage was my husband's excuse. Now hold on. Before you decide what kind of woman I am, before you decide what kind of story this is, let me tell you where it ends, because this story ends with a phone call, a Sunday dinner, my whole family around the table, pot roast going cold, and a name lighting up my phone screen that made every single person in that room stop chewing at the same time. Gordon, my ex-husband, the man who spent 2 decades telling me that women my age should act their age, calling me on a Sunday, after everything. What I said into that phone lasted 11 seconds. 11 seconds that got recorded by accident, sent to the family group chat on purpose, and, I'm told, has now been forwarded to half the women over 60 in the state of Vermont. My own daughter calls it the 11 seconds. My granddaughter calls it Grandma's mic drop. I'll tell you every word of it, but not yet. Because those 11 seconds took me 50 years to earn, and you're going to earn them with me. First, do me a kindness. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I read every one of them with my morning coffee, and I answer more than you'd think. And if you believe, or if you want to believe, that a woman's story doesn't end at 50 or 60 or 70, then press that subscribe button right now. It's free, it takes 1 second, and it tells me to keep talking. All right, come sit by the fire. It's cold out there. My name is Eleanor Whitfield. I'm 70 years old. I live in Burlington, Vermont, where the winters are long and the gossip is longer. And for 33 years, I was the secretary at a doctor's office downtown. The woman behind the desk who knew every patient's name, every grandchild's birthday, and exactly how much cream Dr. Hargrove took in his coffee. I was good at being invisible in a useful way. I'd had a lot of practice at home. I was married for 46 years to a man named Gordon, an accountant, a man who ironed his casual shirts, a man who, on the night of my 50th birthday, said 7 words to me that I obeyed. God help me, I obeyed, for the next 20 years. I'm going to tell you those 7 words in a minute, and when I do, I want every woman listening to check whether she's ever heard some version of them herself. From a husband, from a doctor, from a magazine, from her own mirror. Because I've learned something since that night, something it cost me 2 decades to learn, and it's this: the most dangerous lies aren't the ones people tell us. They're the ones we agree to. That Sunday, with the phone buzzing on the table and the pot roast steaming and my daughter Karen whispering, "Mom, don't answer it," I looked around at all of them, and then I looked at the hand of the man sitting next to me, 61 years old. Clay dried in the creases of his knuckles because he'd come straight from the studio. A man who had never once, in the entire time I'd known him, told me what I was too old for. And I picked up the phone. To understand what happened next, the 11 seconds, the gasp at the table, and the thing that came into the frame of my granddaughter's video at the very end, the thing nobody saw coming, least of all me, you need to go back with me. Back before the retreat. Before the lawyer slid a folder across her desk and said the sentence that broke me worse than the divorce did. Before the snow and the clay and the widower who already knew my name. Back to a warm June night in 2006, my 50th birthday. A new bathrobe with the tag still on, and 7 words. People ask how a marriage of 46 years dies, and they expect a dramatic answer. An affair discovered, a screaming match. Slammed doors. Mine died between the salad and the cake, in a voice so calm it could have been reading a weather report. But let me be fair to the beginning, because there was a beginning, and it was real. I met Gordon Whitfield in 1976 at a college mixer in a gymnasium that smelled like floor wax and nervous cologne. And here is the detail that will matter later, so put it in your pocket. Gordon could dance. Lord, that man could dance. He crossed that whole gymnasium floor to get to me, held out his hand like something out of a movie, and we danced until the band packed up. He was funny back then, precise, even in his jokes. He'd land them like a man balancing a ledger. I liked that. I mistook precision for depth. A lot of us did in those days. We married in 79. Karen came along in 82. Gordon built a good, careful career doing other people's taxes, and I found my place behind the front desk of Dr. Hargrove's practice on Pearl Street. And for a long stretch, I won't rewrite history, we were happy in the quiet, unphotographed way most people are happy. Pancakes on Saturdays, maple syrup from the Hutchins farm, never store-bought. Gordon had standards about exactly 3 things, and syrup was one of them. A lake trip every August. A marriage like a well-kept checkbook, everything accounted for, nothing extravagant. The extravagance drained out slowly. I can't tell you the year the goodnight kiss moved from my lips to my forehead. I can't tell you when "come here" became "sleep well." Those changes don't send announcements. They're like the lake freezing. You never see the moment it happens. One morning, you just notice you could walk across it. But I can tell you the exact night the ice was named. June 14th, 2006, my 50th birthday. Karen had thrown me a little party that afternoon. Lemon cake, neighbors, a banner that said "Fabulous at 50." And that evening, after everyone left, I did something brave by the standards of our marriage. I'd bought myself a bathrobe. Nothing scandalous. Dusty rose, satin trim, the kind of thing the saleswoman called romantic. I took my time. I brushed my hair out. I put on the perfume from Christmas. And I came out of that bathroom at 50 years old, feeling, for the first time in a long while, like a woman instead of a schedule. Gordon was sitting up in bed with his reading glasses on, going through a client folder. He looked at me over the top of the glasses, not up and down, just over the glasses, the way you'd look at an interruption. And he said it. 7 words, in that weather report voice. "Eleanor, honestly, we're too old for that. That's all." Then he went back to the folder. He turned a page. The page made a small, dry sound, and I remember thinking, absurdly, that it was the loudest thing anyone had ever said to me. I stood there in that doorway for, I don't know, 10 seconds, a year. Then I said, "Of course." Silly me, in a bright little voice I didn't recognize, and I hung the robe on the back of the bathroom door, and I got into my side of the bed, and I turned off my lamp. Here's the part that shames me, and I'm telling you anyway, because somewhere out there a woman needs to hear it. I believed him. I was 50, he was 53, and I took those 7 words like a diagnosis from a doctor. I thought, well, that's that then. That part of life is over, and apparently everyone knew it but me, and how embarrassing that I showed up to a closed door in a new robe. I folded that robe away in the bottom drawer with the tag still on, and I folded the woman who bought it away in there with it. And the world, I have to say, backed him up. The magazines at the checkout had nobody my age in them unless they were selling arthritis cream. The ladies at church talked about grandkids and casseroles and knees, never about this, and I assumed their doors were closed too. Maybe some were. Maybe, like me, they were all sitting behind closed doors assuming. That's how the lie works, you see. It doesn't need to be true. It just needs everyone to be too polite to check. So the next 20 years had a shape, and the shape was this. Separate sides of the bed with a demilitarized zone down the middle. Dinner at 5:30 sharp. A forehead kiss on anniversaries. Act your age, Eleanor. When I laughed too loud at Pauline's jokes, when I bought a red coat, when I suggested, once, exactly once, dancing lessons at the community center. Act your age. As if age were a script someone had handed me, and my only job was to not flub the lines. I turned 55, 60, 65. The robe stayed in the drawer. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday 2 years ago, between his coffee and his newspaper, Gordon cleared his throat the way he did before delivering a client's bad news. And the ice I'd been standing on for 20 years cracked straight down the middle. Divorce, in the movies, happens in the rain. Somebody shouts. Somebody throws a wine glass. Mine happened at the kitchen table on a dry Tuesday morning in October, with the Leaf Peepers traffic humming past on the road outside and a percolator gurgling on the counter, and the man I'd been married to for 46 years folded down one corner of his newspaper. He didn't even put it down, just folded the corner like I was a stock price he needed to glance at, and said, "Eleanor, I've met someone. I want a divorce." I remember I was holding the butter dish. I remember setting it down very carefully because some ancient part of my brain decided that whatever else happened that morning, the butter dish was not going to be broken. And I remember my own voice from very far away asking the question you ask, even though no answer will help. "Who?" "Tammy," he said. "From physical therapy. You've met her at the clinic. She's—" And here, God is my witness, this 73-year-old man had the decency to look briefly at his shoes. "She's 48. 48. I want you to sit with that number the way I had to." Because my mind, which had been running quietly in the background for 20 years, did the arithmetic in about half a second, and the arithmetic was this. I was 50 when he told me we were too old. She is 48 now. 2 years younger than the woman he'd retired from touching. 2 years younger than the closed door. 2 years younger than the robe in the drawer. "We're too old for that," he'd said. "We." And for 20 years I'd carried my half of that "we" like a stone in my coat pocket. And it turned out there was never any "we" at all. There was just me, alone, holding a rule he'd written for one. I didn't scream. I wish I could tell you I did. 46 years of training doesn't burn off in a morning. I said something dignified and gray, and he nodded like a client had accepted his invoice, and he took his coffee into the den. And I stood in that kitchen and washed the butter dish, which was already clean, and washed it again. The collapse came later, and it came in the Hannaford parking lot of all the unpoetic places on God's earth. I'd gone to buy, I genuinely don't remember what. I sat in my parked car between a minivan and a shopping cart corral, and it hit me the way weather hits, all at once and from every direction, and I cried the way you cry maybe 3 times in a whole life. Not pretty crying. The kind where you grip the steering wheel like it's the railing of a sinking ship. A young man loading groceries, 2 spaces over, pretended heroically not to see me, and I have been grateful to that stranger ever since. But here's what I need you to understand. I wasn't crying about Tammy yet. I didn't have the whole truth yet. I thought I was crying about a husband leaving. I was actually crying about the last betrayal, and the real one hadn't even been handed to me. That happened 11 days later, in a law office above the bookstore on Church Street. My lawyer's name was Diane Okafor, 50s, reading glasses on a chain, the handshake of a woman who has seen every kind of man there is. She'd requested the financial records, standard procedure, "Just so we know the landscape, Eleanor." And on that 11th day, she sat me down, poured me a coffee I never drank, and slid a folder across the desk. "Before you open that," she said, "I want you to know you did nothing wrong." Lawyers don't say that about spreadsheets. I opened the folder, credit card statements, years of them. A jeweler in Montpellier, earrings, a bracelet, dates that meant nothing to me because they weren't my dates. Restaurants in towns Gordon had claimed to visit for client audits. An inn up in Stowe, the pretty one with the wraparound porch, 4 separate weekends. I flipped the pages with a steady hand, thinking, all right, so Tammy got jewelry, all right, so this went back further than he said. And then Diane reached over, quietly, and turned to the page she'd flagged. The dates at the top of that page were from years ago. Many years. Different amounts, different names, a pattern repeating back and back and back through the records like rings in a cut tree, long before any Tammy had ever laid hands on that man's shoulder at a clinic. I looked up at her, and Diane Okafor took off her reading glasses and she said the sentence that broke me worse than the divorce did. She said it gently, the way you'd tell someone their house didn't burn down by accident. "Mrs. Whitfield, age was never your husband's problem." The room went very quiet. Somewhere below us, the bookstore's doorbell chimed. 20 years. 20 years of believing I'd expired. 20 years of folding myself smaller, of acting my age, of apologizing with my whole body for wanting to be wanted. And the door had never been closed at all. It had just been closed to me. I sat in that law office at 68 years old, and I felt something I had no name for yet. It wasn't heartbreak. Heartbreak was 11 days earlier, in the parking lot. This was something colder and cleaner, like the first breath of air when you walk out of a hospital. It was the truth. And the truth I would come to learn is like Vermont in April. First, it makes everything ugly. Then it makes everything grow. I'm going to tell you about the collapse exactly once, and then we're going to walk out of it together, because I didn't build this story to leave either of us sitting in the dark. What broke me was not the leaving. Women survive leavings. We've had 10,000 years of practice. What broke me was the rewrite. Every memory of the last 2 decades had to be taken down off the shelf and read again under the new light, and every single one read differently. The night of the robe, the forehead kisses, every act your age, all of it had been, not a sad fact of nature like I'd believed, a policy. Written by one man, enforced on one woman, while its author lived by other rules entirely in inns with wraparound porches. Grief for a person is terrible. Grief for time is worse. A person you can bury. Time doesn't even leave you a body. But here's what that grief actually looked like, because I promised you honesty, not poetry. It looked like this. I stopped going to church, not because of God, who I had no quarrel with, but because of the vestibule, that gauntlet of soft voices. How are you, Eleanor? With the head tilted just so, hungry eyes over sympathetic mouths. Meanwhile, and I heard this from 3 separate people, when Gordon started appearing around town with Tammy on his arm, the casserole brigade practically formed a parade line at his door. He got tuna noodle sympathy. I got the head tilt. A man alone at 73 is a tragedy to be fed. A woman alone at 68 is a question to be whispered about. Write that down somewhere. It'll be on the test later in this story. I ate my suppers standing up at the sink because setting one plate at that big table felt like a punchline I refused to perform. I donated the dusty rose bathrobe to Goodwill, tags still on after 18 years. The girl at the counter said, "Aw, this is pretty," and I made it to the car before my face went. And I did one strange thing that I've since learned every widow and every divorcee does in her own way. About a month in, at 2 o'clock one morning, I moved to the middle of the bed, 46 years on the starboard side, holding my ration of mattress like a tenant afraid of the landlord. And I slid over into all that forbidden middle territory and lay there like a starfish, wide awake, half thrilled and half lost. There was so much room. That's the thing nobody tells you about after, the terrible, wonderful room. Karen came by on a Sunday during this stretch. My daughter, whom I love past all reason, who has her father's precision and, back then, her father's version of events. She sat across from me with her coffee, and she said, in the kind voice people use for fragile old ladies, "Mom, maybe you and Dad just grew apart. It happens. Maybe nobody's the villain here." I looked at my daughter, and I thought about the folder in Diane's office, and I heard myself make a choice. Not yet. She wasn't ready, and honestly, I wasn't either. That folder was still radioactive. I couldn't hand it to anyone without burning my own hands. So I swallowed it, and I said, "Maybe so, sweetheart." And I filed the moment away in the place where I was keeping things. It would come back out, that moment. But not yet. The one who wouldn't accept the sink suppers and the starfishing was Pauline, my best friend since we were both office girls in 1978. Pauline of the loud laugh I'd been told to stop encouraging. Pauline who'd buried one husband, divorced another, and outlived the opinions of everybody who judged her for either. She showed up on a Thursday in November with a bottle of wine in one hand and a piece of paper in the other, and she didn't ring the bell. She just came in, because that's what 45 years of friendship buys you. The paper was a flyer, cream-colored, tasteful. Winter Arts Retreat. A week at an inn out past Waterbury. Pottery, watercolor, wood-fired kiln, communal dinners. January. "Pauline," I said, I can't paint." "Nobody there can paint," she said, pouring. "That's not what it's for. You know what it's for? It's a place full of strangers who don't know Gordon Whitfield exists. 7 whole days where nobody tilts their head at you." She put the glass in my hand. "Eleanor, you've spent 2 months in a house that's furnished entirely with him. Even the arguments in your head are with him. You need 1 week. 1 in a room he's never stood in." I looked at the flyer for a long time. Pottery. I'd never touched clay in my life. And then I did the first thing in 46 years that no one had suggested, approved, scheduled, or permitted. I signed my own name to it. It's such a small thing to write down. She filled out a form. But you didn't stand where I was standing. From where I was standing, that cream-colored flyer might as well have been a ship's ticket. I taped it to the refrigerator, where the grocery list used to go. And every time I passed it that December, I felt something scandalous and forgotten flicker in my chest. It took me until New Year's to recognize the feeling. It was forward. For the first time in 20 years, I was looking forward. I had no earthly idea what was waiting for me out past Waterbury, in the snow. If you'd told me, I'd have laughed. If you'd told him, but no. I'm getting ahead of myself. January came. I packed 1 small suitcase. The drive out to the inn took 50 minutes, and I want to tell you about it, because it was the first 50 minutes of the rest of my life, and I didn't know it. And there's something holy about that in hindsight. It had snowed all night and quit at dawn, the way Vermont does when it's showing off. The pines along Route 100 were carrying snow on every branch like waiters carrying trays, and the sky was that hard, rinsed blue you only get in deep January. I had the radio off. I hadn't planned to have the radio off. I just noticed, somewhere past Waterbury Center, that I hadn't turned it on, and that the silence in the car was, for the first time in months, not empty. It was just quiet. There's a difference, and I was 50 minutes into learning it. The inn sat up a plowed drive at the end of a valley. An old white farmhouse with a red barn behind it, wood smoke standing straight up out of 2 chimneys, and a hand-painted sign. Inside, it smelled like coffee and wet wool and wood smoke, and a woman with a clipboard and a fisherman's sweater checked me in and said the sentence I hadn't heard in decades. "And how would you like your name written, hun?" I stood there. Behind me, somebody's boots were stamping off snow. And I heard myself say, "Eleanor, just Eleanor." Not Mrs. Whitfield, not Gordon's wife, not Karen's mother, not the doctor's secretary. For 1 week, in 1 valley, to 16 strangers. Just Eleanor. If you have never lost your own name inside a life, you can't know what it is to get it handed back to you by a woman with a clipboard. I carried my suitcase up the stairs like it weighed nothing. There were 16 of us. A retired firefighter from Rutland, learning watercolor with hands the size of dinner plates. 2 sisters from Montreal who bickered in French and painted in silence. A young man with a beard who'd just gotten sober and said so at dinner, plainly, and nobody flinched, and I thought, what a country this is, this table. Nobody head tilted at anybody. Everybody at that inn was there because some room in their life had gotten too small, and it made a strange, instant democracy of us. Pottery was in the barn, mornings, taught by a woman named Greta with forearms like a blacksmith and a voice like a radio host. The first morning, she sat us each down at a wheel, dropped a grapefruit-sized lump of gray clay in front of us, and gave a speech I could recite to you in my sleep because part of it turned out to be the sentence of my year. "Rule 1, Greta said, you will fail today, and it will be wonderful. Rule 2, wet your hands. Rule 3, and she looked around at all of us, 16 runaways in borrowed aprons. The clay doesn't accept hurry. You can't rush it, you can't bully it, and you can't sweet-talk it. You can only show up steady and let it become what it's ready to become. The clay doesn't accept hurry. Put that in your pocket too, next to the dancing. It comes back. I was terrible. Gloriously, gorgeously terrible. My first bowl collapsed like a souffle. My second flew off the wheel entirely and hit the firefighter's boot, and he picked it up and said, Deadpan. I've had worse thrown at me, and I laughed. Loud, the Pauline-approved laugh, the act-your-age laugh, and nobody in that barn so much as looked up. And my eyes stung, right there over the wheel, because it turns out you can grieve a thing as small as laughing freely. You just don't find out until it's given back. It was the third morning when the door of the barn opened and let the cold in, and Greta called out, "Everybody, this is my old friend Samuel, best hands in the Northeast Kingdom. He's here through the weekend to help fire the kiln, so be nice to him and he'll fix your disasters." I'll tell you exactly what I saw, because I remember it the way you remember a photograph. A man of 60 or so, tall, unhurried, stamping snow off his boots in the doorway with the light behind him. Gray beard kept short. A gray wool sweater with a mended elbow, mended well, visibly, in slightly wrong yarn, and I remember thinking that told me something, though I couldn't have said what. He hung his coat on a peg like a man who'd hung 1,000 coats on 1,000 pegs, no wasted motion, and he went around the room quietly for the next hour, crouching by wheels, saying 5 words where another man would have said 50. When he got to me, my bowl, my third of the day, was in the process of dying its usual death, walls wobbling like a Sunday jello. He crouched down, looked at it some more, and said, "You're afraid of it." "I beg your pardon?" "The clay." He nodded at my hands. "You're holding it like it might file a complaint. It won't. It wants more of you, not less." And then he stood and moved on to the Montreal sisters, and that was the whole conversation. It wants more of you, not less. I sat at that wheel with gray water dripping off my elbows, 70 years old in a borrowed apron, absolutely leveled by 6 words from a stranger about a bowl. That night, at the communal table, he sat across from me, and passing the bread, he held my eyes 1 second longer than the bread required. I'm old, not blind. I know what a second too long means. I'd just forgotten anyone had one to spend on me. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, buttering my roll while the snow came down blue in the windows, was that the man across the table wasn't seeing a stranger at all. Samuel already knew my name. He'd known it for years. And the reason why was going to take my legs right out from under me. Let me tell you what falling feels like at 70, because the magazines never will. It is not fireworks. Fireworks are for people with time to waste on noise. At 70, it's quieter and much more dangerous. It's noticing that you've started wearing your good earrings to a pottery barn. It's hearing a truck in the inn's driveway and knowing, from the engine, mind you, whether it's his. It's a week of dinners at a long table where 2 chairs somehow keep ending up across from each other, and neither party will admit to arranging it because both parties absolutely are. Samuel stayed past the weekend. Greta needed him for the kiln, she said, with the face of a woman fooling no one, least of all herself. So there was the week. And since I'm allowed to keep some things, and I am, being 70 means you've finally learned which doors of yourself are on hinges and which are on springs. I'll give you the true shape of it in 4 pieces. The mornings. He'd appear beside my wheel without announcement and fix what was failing, never by taking over. That's the detail I want the women listening to hear. Gordon, God rest his working knees, fixed things by removal. Give it here, Eleanor, you're doing it wrong. Samuel fixed things by addition. A hand cupped briefly outside my hands, correcting the pressure, then gone. There. Feel that? That's yours now. He gave the fixing away. I had lived 68 years without knowing a man could do that. The walks, afternoons, the retreat crowd would scatter, and twice, then 3 times, then daily, Samuel and I ended up on the plowed loop that ran down past the frozen pond. Wool hats, breath like smoke, boots squeaking. He told me about his work, the studio he kept in a converted sugar house, the apprentices he took on and fed too well. He was a widower. Ruth, her name was. 4 years gone. And he said her name the way you set down something made of glass. And I liked him more for it, not less. I told him about the office, 33 years of patients' names, Karen, Pauline. I told him about the divorce in the smallest possible box. My husband decided we were old. Then he ran off with someone who wasn't. Samuel walked 6 full steps in silence. Then he said, "That man left the tap running and complained about the water bill." And I laughed so hard I had to stop walking and hold onto a fence post, alone in the snow with a man I'd known 5 days, laughing at the ruin of my whole life and feeling that ruin get 1 size smaller. The hand, Thursday morning. My bowl was wobbling. A big one, ambitious. Greta had raised her eyebrows at it. And Samuel crouched and cupped his hands outside mine to steady the walls, standard procedure, done a dozen times. Except this time, neither of us moved for a moment past the necessary moment. Wet clay, 4 hands, 1 bowl slowly truing itself between us. And something went through me that I am not going to be vulgar about, but that I am also not going to lie about, because the lie is the whole reason this channel exists. It was want. Plain, human, undeniable want. At 70 years old, arriving like a train I'd been told was canceled decades ago. I got up. I said something about needing air. I walked out of that barn into 15-degree sunshine and stood there with clay drying on my hands, breathing like I'd run a mile. And I said out loud, to the pines, to nobody, "It's not dead." 20 years I'd believed that part of me had died on schedule, right when he said it would, the way you believe a doctor. And it had never died at all. It had been sitting in the dark exactly where I'd left it, in the bottom drawer, tags still on, waiting for one careless, gentle man to open the drawer by accident. I cried a little, out there in the cold. Not sad crying, inventory crying, the kind you do when you find out how much was stolen. The last night of the retreat, there was wine by the fire, and the group thinned out toward bed until the fire got down to coals, and it was Samuel and me and 2 armchairs. And it felt like a door, that hour, so I walked through it. I told him the rest, the robe, the 7 words, 20 years of the middle of the bed being a foreign country, the folder in the lawyer's office, all of it, once, plainly, into the fire, while he listened the way he did everything, adding nothing, taking nothing. When I finished, the coals ticked. Snow shifted off the roof somewhere. And Samuel leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, turned his glass a slow half-turn, and said, "Eleanor, before this goes where I'd like it to go, and I would like it to go there, I have to tell you something, and you may want to take your wine back for it." I said, "Well, now you have to." He nodded, looked into the fire, and said, "I knew your name before you ever got here. I've known it for years." The fire ticked. I did not take my wine back, but I set it down because my hands wanted to be empty for whatever was coming. "Go on," I said. Samuel was quiet for a moment, the way he was quiet before centering a piece, gathering, not hesitating. And then he told me, "I'm going to give it to you the way he gave it to me, because it deserves to be told whole, once, and never picked apart again." "My wife's name was Ruth," he said. "Ruth Ellery. She was a paper conservator. She fixed old books for the library up in Montpellier, 150-year-old town records, family Bibles. She could make torn things whole. It was the joke of our marriage, that between us we could repair anything except a decent income." He smiled at the coals. 12 years ago she found a lump, and her doctor, the one she trusted, the one she wouldn't switch from even when we moved, was Dr. Hargrove, on Pearl Street, in Burlington. The room went very still around me. He kept his eyes on the fire, and I was grateful, because whatever my face was doing, it needed privacy to do it. "For 2 years," Samuel said, "I drove her down for her appointments. And for 2 years, the first face she saw when she walked in scared. And she was scared, Eleanor. She was scared every single time. She just did it beautifully. The first face was a secretary who never once made her repeat her name, who never made her spell it, who'd say, 'Ruth, honey, he's running 10 minutes behind. Sit by the window. The light's better there.' Ruth used to say it in the car. 'The light's better there.' She'd say the whole waiting room ought to send that woman flowers because the doctor treated the cancer, but the front desk treated the person. I had my hand over my mouth by then. I'm telling you that plainly. 70 years old, hand over my mouth like a girl, because I remembered her. Of course I remembered her. Ruth Ellery, second to last appointment on Thursdays, silk scarves after the chemo started, a paper conservator's precise little signature on the forms. You don't forget the Thursday people. You carry them. The last appointment, Samuel said, and his voice changed here, dropped into a register I understood, because grief has a register, was in March. We knew by then. The appointment was just arithmetic at that point. Hargrove telling us the shape of the time left. I dropped her at the door and went to park because it was sleeting, and by the time I got inside... He stopped, turned the glass another half turn. By the time I got inside, my wife was sitting in the window chair, where the light's better, and the secretary had come out from behind her desk, left it, phones ringing and all, and she was sitting beside her, holding her hand. Not saying anything, just holding it. And Ruth wasn't scared. For that 1 minute, in that window, my wife was not scared. I stood in that doorway with sleet melting down my collar, and I watched a stranger give my wife the last unafraid minute I ever saw her have. The fire settled. Somewhere in the inn, a pipe knocked. I could not have spoken if the building had been burning. I never got your name that day, he said. Wasn't in any condition to. But 2 years after Ruth passed, I wrote a letter to the practice. A thank you, the kind you write when you're finally able, and the reply came back signed by the office manager, and it mentioned you. Eleanor. Eleanor at the front desk sends her condolences and remembers Ruth's scarves. He finally looked at me. I kept the letter. It's in her recipe tin. And 3 weeks ago, Greta sends me the roster for this retreat, the way she always does. And there it is, halfway down the page. Eleanor. Burlington. And I sat in my kitchen, and I thought, well, life mostly loses your mail. But every once in a while, it delivers a kindness back to the wrong address on purpose. Now, I want to be careful with what I say next, because this is the part everybody asks about, and I've learned to say it exactly right. Samuel did not come to that retreat for me. It wasn't a plan or a pursuit or anything a suspicious mind could make sticky. He came because Greta asked, the way he had for 10 years, and because a name on a roster made an old ache turn over in its sleep. I told myself I'd just look, he said. Just see the face that went with the window chair. And then you laughed at Frank's boot on the second day, and I was in a certain amount of trouble. I cried then, openly, by the fire, and here is the strange grace of it. I wasn't crying for myself, for once. I was crying for Ruth, who fixed torn things, for a man who'd stood in a doorway with sleet on his collar and carried one window-lit minute for 8 years like a coal in his pocket. And underneath it, quietly, this. For 20 years I had believed I was a woman past seeing. And it turned out that during those exact years, the drawer years, the forehead kiss years, somebody had seen me. Not my figure, not my age, not anything Gordon's ledger could price. Somebody had seen the realest thing I ever did, which was leave the desk and hold a scared woman's hand, and he'd kept the seeing in a recipe tin. You spend 2 decades being told you're invisible. Then you find out you were visible the whole time, to the right pair of eyes, for the right reasons. There's no word in English for what that does. There should be. What happened after that happened slowly, because we were neither of us young, and both of us carrying dishes we didn't intend to drop. The retreat ended. The phone calls didn't. He drove down to Burlington in February with a repaired mug and poor excuses. I drove up to the Sugar House studio in March and stayed for supper. And it was April, mud season, the ugliest, most honest month Vermont owns, when I stayed past supper, in that house that smelled of wood smoke and wet clay. And Samuel took my hand at the foot of the stairs and felt it shaking and said the finest thing a man has ever said to me. We've got all the time we've got, and the clay doesn't accept hurry. I won't take you up those stairs. That door's on hinges, not springs, and it stays mine. But I'll tell you what you actually need to know. What the woman watching this at 2 a.m. with her own drawer full of folded away things needs to know. I'll tell you what I whispered to the ceiling of that farmhouse afterward, laughing and crying at once, while a patient man pretended to be asleep so I could have the moment to myself. Everything he said didn't work anymore. Worked. It always worked. Every year of those 20 years. There was never anything wrong with the wiring in this old house. Somebody had just been lying about the electricity. We were careless exactly once, and once was all Burlington needed. The winter farmers' market, of all places. February, a year after the retreat. Samuel had driven down and we were walking the stalls, cheese, wool, a fiddler playing for a hat, and somewhere between the maple stand and the bread table, his hand found mine. Gloved hand in gloved hand, two people of a combined age of 131, buying bread. You'd think we'd set fire to the church. Betsy Cardell saw us. Betsy from my old congregation, who has never in her life let a piece of information reach its destination unescorted. I watched it happen in real time. The double take, the little oh. The phone practically levitating out of her purse before we'd cleared the bread table. Samuel felt me stiffen and said, mild as milk, "Should I have bought her a loaf too?" And I laughed and decided I didn't care. 48 hours later, my daughter was standing in my living room, and she cared enough for the whole county. I promised you this confrontation with the dialogue intact, so here it is, the once and only time. "Mom." Karen had her coat still on, which is how I knew the size of it. "Were you going to tell me, or was I supposed to keep hearing about my mother's boyfriend from Betsy Cardell's daughter at spin class?" "I was going to tell you when it was mine to enjoy instead of yours to approve." That landed. She blinked. But she'd driven 40 minutes on a full tank of indignation, and it needed burning. Who even is this man? A potter? From the kingdom? Mom, you're 70 years old. I know exactly how old I am, Karen. I've had the number announced to me daily for 20 years. And people are talking. Do you understand that? Sharon Cardell is telling people you've got some artist boyfriend, holding hands at the market like a teenager. What will people think? And there it was, the family motto, arriving right on schedule, wearing my daughter's face. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I've learned you never need to if you're willing to be precise, and precision, God help me, is the one inheritance from Gordon I've kept. I said, "Let me tell you what people thought before now, sweetheart, since we're doing inventory. Your father left me for a woman of 48, and this town threw him a casserole parade. I have held one widower's hand at a bread stand, and I'm getting a trial. So you tell me what people think, Karen. I already know what they think. They think a man alone is a tragedy, and a woman alive is a scandal, and I have given that arithmetic 46 years of my life, and I am done being the only one in this family who pays it." Silence. The mantel clock had the whole room to itself for a while. Karen sat down, finally, coat and all. And she said, quieter, and this is the part that actually hurt. "You could have fought for the marriage is all. You and Dad were fine. You just drifted. And now you're rebounding with the first. Wait here," I said. And I walked to the den, and I took the folder out of the desk, Diane's folder, the one I'd been protecting her from for over a year. Protecting him, really, some old reflex of the wife I no longer was. And I set it in my daughter's lap, and I said, "You're a grown woman. You keep telling me so. Read it like one." And I went and made tea I didn't want, because some things a person has to read alone. From the kitchen, I heard the pages. I heard them slow down. I heard them stop, on the page Diane had flagged, the one with the dates that went back and back. And I heard my daughter, 51 years old, her father's precision, her father's defender, say very quietly, "Oh." And then after a long time, "Mom, the dates. These dates are, Mom, this starts when I was in college." I came in and sat beside her. She had her hand over her mouth, my same gesture. It's a funny thing what we hand down. And Karen looked up at me with 20 years reorganizing themselves behind her eyes. Every Christmas, every anniversary, every "your mother's just tired." And she said the clumsy, perfect thing. "You were never the boring one, were you?" "No, sweetheart," I said. "I was just the honest one." She didn't hug me. We're Vermonters. Feelings travel by freight, not air. But she took my teacup and refilled it without asking, which in this family is a sacrament. And on her way out, coat finally off and then on again, she stopped at the door and said, "This Potter, does he make you laugh?" Every day, loudly. Nobody's told me to act my age in a year. My daughter nodded slowly, like a woman signing off on an audit. "Good," she said. "Then Betsy Cardell can eat snow." Word of the folder never left the family. We don't do that. But word of the shift did. You can feel a town change its mind. It's a weather event. And somewhere in there, the news reached the last address on the route. Gordon heard about Samuel. I'm told, by Pauline, who has her sources, that he went quiet at the diner counter when he heard, quiet in a way Tammy noticed. I'm told Tammy had been noticing a lot of things by then. The 5:30 dinners, the ironed casual shirts, the ledger where his heart should be. Winter was coming again, and with it, a Sunday, a pot roast, and a telephone. Before the phone rings, and it's going to ring, I promised you, let me show you one ordinary Saturday from this past October, because the phone call only means something if you know what it was interrupting. 6:40 in the morning, the Sugar House studio up in the Kingdom. If you've never been inside a Potter's studio at dawn, you've missed one of the world's good rooms. Wood stove ticking, shelves of drying pots standing in rows like a choir, everything smelling of earth and coffee. Samuel fires the kiln on Saturdays, which means he's up before the birds, which means at 6:40 he comes back up to the house with coffee, mine in the lopsided blue mug I made at the retreat, my third bowl reincarnated. The ugliest object either of us owns and the only one that's non-negotiable. And he sets it on the nightstand and says the same 4 words he said every Saturday for a year and a half. "No hurry. It's Saturday. No hurry. A man brings you coffee and permission. I spent 4 decades learning what a marriage costs. Nobody ever told me what one could pay. By 8, I'm at my own wheel. He built me one. Set it by the south window where the light's better. Yes, he did that on purpose, and yes, I cried. And here is a sentence I could not have invented 2 years ago. I sell my pottery now. Me. Eleanor. There's a stall at the Burlington Artisans Market with my bowls on it, and a little card Pauline had printed up that says, "Eleanor, handmade in the Northeast Kingdom, and the summer people buy them faster than I can throw them." A girl of maybe 25 bought 3 in August and told her friend, "This lady started at 68. That's literally iconic." And I didn't fully understand the grammar of that, but Pauline assures me it goes on my tombstone. In late September, Samuel and I drove the Kancamagus to see the leaves, my first foliage trip in 40 years where somebody didn't calculate the gas mileage out loud. And at an overlook, a young couple offered to take our picture. Him in that mended gray sweater, me in a red coat. Yes, a red coat. I bought it the week the divorce papers were finalized, and I wear it the way other people wear a ring. I posted the photograph. 1 photo, no caption. And I watched, over the following days, as the likes came in from unexpected places, church ladies, old patients, 2 of the Thursday People's daughters. And as a certain older Burlington sat on its hands, wanting to comment and not knowing what was permitted. The silence was its own comment. I framed the photo anyway. Some pictures you take for the album. That one I took for the record. Do I think about Gordon? You'd ask, so I'll answer once. I do, the way you think about a house you lived in that had no windows on the south side. Not with hate. Hate would flatter him with heat. What I feel, when I feel anything, is a strange, downhill pity. Because I've done the arithmetic he taught me to do, and it comes out like this. To keep me small, he had to live small alongside me. Dinners at 5:30, joy on a ration book, 20 years of pretending the tap was broken while sneaking water in other towns. He didn't just steal my light. He sat in the dark next to me to guard the theft. There are cleverer prisons, but I've never heard of a stupider warden. And then, this past November, Pauline called. Pauline's calls have a taxonomy, and I knew from the first syllable this was Category 1, news. She left him, Pauline said. No preamble. We're too old for preambles. Tammy, moved out 3 weeks ago. Donna's cousin does her hair, so this is primary source, Eleanor. Cited, and I quote the hairdresser quoting her, I didn't sign up to be a nurse and a maid for a man who eats supper at 5:30 and checks the receipts. Pauline let that sit, connoisseur that she is. 48 years old, and she lasted 26 months. You did 46 years, honey. They should study you at the university. I laughed. And then, for one unguarded minute after we hung up, I stood at the window and didn't laugh, because I could see it, you understand. The house I'd kept for 4 decades, dark by 9. One plate at the big table. A man of 75 discovering, far too late, that the smallness he'd enforced was the only thing that had ever truly belonged to him. I'd eaten at that table. I knew exactly how cold that kitchen gets in November. I want to be honest with you. For that 1 minute, I felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the folder and the robe and the girl at Goodwill saying, "Ah, this is pretty." And the minute passed, the way weather does. I thought that was the end of it. A quiet, correct ending, the kind Vermont approves of. He'd stay in his ledger, I'd stay in my light. 2 parallel lines, nothing left to intersect. Which brings us to the second Sunday of December. My table now, my house. Pot roast, Karen and her husband, my granddaughter Emma home from UVM with her phone permanently in her hand, Pauline, who is family by every measure that counts, and Samuel beside me, having driven down through the first real snow. Emma was filming the table, the way the young do. For my story, Grandma, narrating the pot roast like a nature documentary. And my phone, face up by the breadbasket, lit. The whole table saw the name at once. 6 people stopped chewing in unison, which I can now report makes a sound, and the sound is silence with edges. Gordon. Karen said low, "Mom, don't answer it." Emma, bless her, did not stop filming, and I looked at the name. And then at the clay-creased hand resting easy on the table next to mine. 46 years on one side of the scale, 18 months on the other, and the scale not even trembling. "Oh, I'm answering it," I said, and I reached for the phone, and my thumb caught the speaker button on the way up, caught it or pressed it. You know, I've been asked many times. I've decided to let history wonder. The speaker crackled. Snow ticked at the window. 6 people and 1 pot roast held their breath. Eleanor. Gordon's voice filled my dining room, and here was the first surprise. It was smaller than I remembered. All those years, it had sounded like a verdict. Now it sounded like a man reading his own fine print. "I'm glad you picked up. I wasn't sure you would." "It's Sunday, Gordon. What do you need?" A pause. I could hear his kitchen behind him. No radio, no television, the specific silence of one plate. "I've been doing some thinking," he said, "about us, about everything. I'll be direct." And then Gordon Whitfield, CPA, delivered the closing argument he had clearly drafted, redrafted, and rehearsed to the refrigerator. "I made an error in judgment. I see that now, and I've been thinking that. At our age, Eleanor, people like us belong together. We know each other. It's practical. We're too old to be starting over with strangers. We're too old for all this foolishness." Too old. He actually said it. Into a speakerphone, into a room he didn't know was full. The man reached into his pocket after all those years and pulled out the only coin he'd ever carried and offered me the same 7-word currency one more time, as an invitation now. Come back to the drawer, Eleanor. It's practical in the drawer. Emma's phone was trembling slightly. Karen had gone pale. Pauline looked like a woman at the theater on opening night. And Samuel looked at me with no anxiety anywhere on his face, and under the table his knee rested against mine, steady as a kiln, and his eyes said what they always say, "No hurry. It's yours. 11 seconds. Here they are, exactly as 100 and some women in a group chat have now heard them. Gordon, you were right all those years. Somebody in that marriage was too old for love. I let it sit one beat, the way you let a bowl find center. It just was never me. Good night." And I hung up and set the phone face down by the bread and said, "Karen, pass the carrots, honey. They're getting cold." The table detonated. Pauline was on her feet, applauding like it was the opera. Karen was laughing and crying into her napkin at the same time. Emma was screaming "Grandma" at a volume that has since been immortalized because, as you may have guessed, Emma's video did not stay on Emma's phone. It went to the family chat, just for the aunts, and the aunts have friends, and the friends have friends, and by New Year's, strangers in the supermarket were touching my arm by the frozen peas and whispering, 11 seconds, like a password. But that's not the ending. The ending is what Emma's camera caught next, in the last 4 seconds of the video, and I promise you nobody at that table saw it coming, least of all me. Because as the cheering was still rising, Samuel reached into the pocket of that gray mended sweater, and he set something down on the white tablecloth in front of me without one word, in the middle of the happy roar. A ring, not a diamond. A thin gold band with a single river-green stone, jade I'd learn, that he had turned and set himself, on the same wheel where he'd once told a frightened bowl it wanted more of me, not less. He'd been carrying it, he admitted later, for a month and a half. Waiting for the right moment, because the clay doesn't accept hurry. And when the phone rang, and he heard what I did with it, heard me close the last open door of the old life with 11 seconds and ask for the carrots, he decided the moment had arrived on its own schedule, the way the good ones do. The video ends with the sound of a room going from roar to gasp to complete silence, my hand over my mouth, and Pauline's voice, off camera, delivering the final line of the whole story better than I ever could. "Well, somebody at this table is clearly not too old for anything." We're marrying in May in the studio, by the south window, where the light's better. Emma is filming it. Betsy Cardell is not invited, but let's be honest. She'll have the footage by supper time, and this once, I hope she shares it widely. So now it's just you and me, and here is the only thing I actually came here to say tonight. If you are 55, 65, 75, if somebody has handed you 7 words, or 5, or 1 look over the top of their glasses, and you folded yourself into a drawer because of it, hear me. They were describing their limits, not yours. There is no expiration date printed anywhere on you. I've looked. The only one that counts is the one you agree to, and you are allowed, at any age, at every age, to tear it off the jar. I spent 20 years being told the fire was out. It was never out. Nobody's is. It's just waiting for a room with better light. Never too old. Not you. Not me. Not ever. Now, your turn, and I mean it. Has anyone ever told you that you were too old for something? What was it, and did you do it anyway? Put it in the comments, and tell me what city you're watching from, because I read every single one with my coffee, in a house that smells like wood smoke and clay. Good night from Vermont, sugar, wear the red coat.